Hey everybody, and welcome to Jack Lake Weed Warrior TV. This is our first episode, and we're happy to have Dr. David Lane. Now, just give me a hint here, David. You spell your name Lean,
Indeed.
and yet I seem to think that it's pronounced Lane. What's up with that?
It goes back, I guess, into the history. We came from the south west part of England near Cornwall. And also the David Lane, the director of
Yes.
Bridge on the River Kwai.
Yep.
I've heard years ago being interviewed, and they called him David Lean, and he corrected them and said, no, it's Lane.
There we go. So you and the famous director have much in common. Well,
yeah.
At least your last names. I mean,
if you Google me, you get the two of us. And if you say science, then you get some of the things that I've done.
Well, there you go. I did notice that on Google the other day. So, David, you're a PhD, and your PhD is in something really cool. And can you tell us a little bit about that academic background?
Yes. They call it limnology, which is part of a biology department. And people know about oceanographers. So we're kind of like a freshwater oceanographer. And so actually my first degree was chemical engineering, and I worked for two of Canada's biggest chemical companies. And since I have grown up on Jack's Lake and know about the pristine countryside, it occurred to me to ask, where are all these toxic chemicals going?
Wow.
And so, yes, I worked in industry and enjoyed it very much for about 5 years, and then went back and did a PhD in the zoology department of University of Toronto. And my specialization was on phosphorus, which is the limiting nutrient for plant growth in lakes. So this includes the algae and the weeds. So after that, I worked for Environment Canada at their research center in Burlington, which was first called Canada's Centre for Inland Waters.
Yeah.
And then the National Water Research Institute. So I did a lot of work on the problems of phosphorus in the Great Lakes. They call it eutrophication, where you get an increase in weed growth, in an algae, you get oxygen depletion, that sort of thing. Along the way, I also picked up the business of looking after toxic chemicals. And so my area became more not just the freshwater ecology, but rather toxicology as well. So I moved from Environment Canada to University of Ottawa, where I was chair of that department in environmental toxicology, and at the same time served as the science advisor to the International Joint Commission. There were 3 Canadian scientists, 3 Americans. So we dealt with transboundary pollution problems of the Great Lakes ecosystem.
Wow. So here we are, Jack Lake and Apsley, and
Yes.
you've grown up in this area, and here you're a world-leading expert, right here. This
So
is great.
yes, after I retired, I came back home. So yes, my grandfather moved to this area in 1870.
Wow.
So yes, my roots are here in the countryside, and I grew up on Jack's Lake.
Isn't that great? Well, and thank you for your thought leadership on, our ecosystem here. And one of the things we want to be able to do is tap into that knowledge. One quick question though, was it your grandfather or great grandfather that moved up here in 1870?
My grandfather.
Your grandfather, was he on the run from the law? Was he trying to escape?
No.
I mean, why would you move?
No, he was a farmer.
Okay.
And so trying to farm the Canadian Shield is a very difficult task.
Yes.
So then my father open a small tourist business on Jack's Lake.
Yes. Yeah,
And
which is
so,
now known as the Anchorage, I guess. Huh?
yes, that's correct. And also, yes, back in those days, there were some very interesting people would come to fish and enjoy the. And at one time, he told me actually the Governor General of Ontario was a fishing partner of his. So
Ah,
he had a lot of interesting people coming, and
okay.
as even myself. Had some members of parliament from Ottawa that used to like to come and
Mhm.
have some fishing.
Well, that's great. I think they're still fishing in Ottawa, frankly, um, for some freshwater ideas or some fresh ideas. We'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
So, David, we are experiencing this invasion, this invasive aqua weed situation,
Yeah.
kind of starring Eurasian milfoil. How did the Eurasian milfoil get to Jack Lake? I mean, how did we get so lucky?
Yeah, or unlucky.
Yes.
Yes, they it it's called an invasive species, which means it came from somewhere else, and someone brought it to our lake because it was associated with their boat, and they had been boating in a lake where it was present, and then they came to Jack's Lake and reintroduced it here. But this is not just unique to our lake, it's practically the majority of lakes right across Canada and the United States now have this invasive species. And all invasive species kind of have an edge initially. They can get ahead of the other native plants until predators and infectious diseases and other controlling factors
Right.
take over, and then it behaves itself. So we can learn from lakes like Chemung Lake, where this problem was very severe back in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
And so it seems to run its course, as it does in many other places, for about 5 to 8 years. And then it dies back and it becomes just part of the. There's probably 20 other weed species in Jack's Lake.
Right.
And every fisherman knows that this is where you go to catch fish, as you go fish next to a weed bed and you'll pull in some good ones.
This weed, this invasive weed, Eurasian milfoil, is certainly been around for quite a while, and I did the research and see how it's really affected the Midwest of the United States, Minnesota, Wisconsin. It's come up into, of course, Canada. We're not special by any means as it comes to weeds. So, yeah, we've got other lakes that are experiencing this. Now, is there a way to slow the invasive species? I mean, is there a way we can, as cottagers individually or as a group, try to limit this the spread?
Yes, and most of the attempts are pretty short-lived.
Right.
People have tried putting mats down to try and smother them. They've tried to shade them to slow their growth. Most of these techniques have done very little good. So they've tried to resort to using herbicides, which are a very toxic chemical. The people spraying it would like to tell you that, that's safe. But safe, when you hear somebody say safe, they don't know very much about what they're talking about. There's always risks.
Sure.
And so the cliche that's often used in the business is the benefits outweigh the risk. Well, in this case, no. There are very serious risks, and they're kind of being washed by our provincial and federal governments. I think it's a very serious problem. And on our website, we posted some references of well-recognized scientists that do indeed show that it's toxic to the little invertebrates that live in the mud and the fish that eat the invertebrates.
Sure.
We can resort to herbicides, but I think it's a very short-term solution.
Yeah, it seems to me to be a slippery slope if one, and there can be little doubt that they're efficacious, but again, in the short term, if you use a herbicide on milfoil this year, the milfoil is growing back next year. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I was going to point out that you get rid of the weeds you can see, but it doesn't kill the roots.
Right.
So it'll be back next year, and you'll need to get the guy to come and spray again.
Wow.
And so as the years go on, you'll have to keep paying and keep spraying, keep adding this toxic chemical that indeed will move to your neighbor's drinking water.
Yeah.
So if you do absolutely nothing, it'll, as I say, behave itself after 5 or 8 years.
Okay.
And so you say, well, how do I get into my dock if it's really thick? Well, the answer there is also very simple. And I had a very enjoyable week. I guess it was a Saturday afternoon. I took over a weed rake, and you throw it out, you drag it through the weeds. And we took away 8 big recycled containers of weeds, took them up the back where they'll compost and make good soil for the garden.
Yeah.
And so it was a very enjoyable visit on a Saturday afternoon, and you hardly see any weeds. So yes, a little effort now and then, and the problem isn't gone, but at least it's not as objectionable.
Yeah. Okay, so David, tell us a little bit about where the Eurasian milfoil seems to prosper. Why does it grow in some places and not as much in others? Is there something going on that we should know about?
Yes. Number one, it won't grow on rocks.
There you go.
So where it grows is where sediments accumulate. And these are the fine-grained, mucky sediments that you don't want to walk in. But they are the perfect place for weeds of all kinds to develop.
Yeah.
So they derive all of their nutrients from the mud. So where does and in fact, it's again, phosphorus and nitrogen are the critical nutrients for growth. So where does that come from? It comes from runoff from our soils, and the phosphorus is from using fertilizer or having leaky septic tanks. Some phosphorus comes in the rain, some nitrogen comes in the rain, but this is kind of historical levels. And the high levels that contribute to high level weed growth are usually from people. Right. And the mistakes people are making is to change our Canadian shield from the vegetation that exists here, and they cut down trees, increase erosion, and then they plant a lawn, and surprise, surprise, lawns don't grow very well on the soil of the Canadian shield. Right. So they bring in other soil, and then they add fertilizer. And I can tell you, a bay like Brooks Bay, one bag of 10-10-10 fertilizer would turn it to the color of pea soup, 150-pound bag. So people are using fertilizer right now. And so most of it, fortunately, is retained in the soil for a short time. Mm-hmm. But gradually, like the septic tank, it'll reach the lake. So just a few days ago, I was putting by looking at all the lovely lawns in Brooks Bay, thinking, what a terrible mistake people are making. How did they want to change something that's beautiful into something that looks like it should be in the city? But then I looked down on the water, and surprise, surprise, it's probably the worst weed growth in Jack's Lake. It is right next to these $1 million special cottages with their wonderful looking dark green lawns that don't exist unless you use fertilizer.
Yeah. So if you're going to have, I mean, yeah, I've tried to plant trees on our island, and the topsoil. So, but
but
if
yeah, just while you're there,
yeah,
that's really an important point. I've been by your place, and it looks lovely. So there's trees everywhere. So the natural process, you'll see trees growing out of a little crack in the rock,
yes,
and you've got trees all over your island. But cut them down and try and plant new ones, and you're going to be in a losing situation.
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's definitely I should run for the president of the Optimist Club. Um, if there is one, I'll join it. Um, so if you, I mean, okay, so let's say you have a lawn and you've brought the soil in and you planted the seeds.
Yeah.
Can nature just take its course then, or I mean, the folks that are, I'm fine with lawns. I mean, I'm not a great fan, but okay, fine, you've got a lawn, but then you're out there with a spreader and a lawnmower, and the rain comes, and woo, I mean, it's right into the lake.
So yes, what should one do if you've maybe bought a cottage and there's a lawn there, or you tried to grow one and you did your best and you have this nice green thing. So every weekend you come to the cottage, instead of sitting on the dock or going fishing, you got to cut the grass. Seems counterproductive, but now you got it. What are you going to do with it?
Right.
And the answer is absolutely nothing. People get out there with with their blower to get rid of leaves and pine needles. This is part of nature. Needles, pine needles, and leaves should fall to the ground where they're decomposed and recycle the energy back to the natural vegetation, not the pansies that you bring to have a nice, pretty garden. But just forget about it. And if you want, if the if the remaining grass gets too tall, perhaps cut a few walk paths through it, but leave most of it just to grow. And you will be absolutely surprised what happens. You will have a symphony of flowers that come from nature that will just progress over the season. At my place, I kind of sit there and look at them, because every week or so you get a different variety, kind of coming and going, and the birds and butterflies seem to like them too.
Sure. It's better for the ecosystem. I guess.
Oh, much better. Yes.
I mean, you're the science guy, David. You're the science guy in Jack Lake Weed Warriors. I'm just a guy with a logo, but you actually know the science, so. This is a good thing. And you were one of the first people to join Jack Lake Weed Warriors, which was super. And I thank you very much for that. Okay, so let's talk about septic systems. What's going on there? How can we as cottagers and how can we as a group fight back against we're affecting the water quality as well as promoting weed growth. So what are we going to do?
Yeah, and I mean, cottagers were usually built for the family, but what we're seeing now are something that more approaches a guest house. Some of them absolute, 8 bedrooms and 8 bathrooms.
Yeah,
so
it's a lake house as opposed to a cottage.
So where is the septic tank? And hopefully it's as far away from the water as possible. And if there is some topsoil, some of the phosphorus will be at least retained for a short time, but there's kind of conflicting ideas in the literature. Some people think that eventually all the phosphorus will make it to the lake, whereas other people say much of it becomes retained and it'll go into the pine trees and the grass and everything else.
Right.
So septic tanks are designed for drainage. Otherwise, you end up with a puddle in your backyard.
Right.
But having the septic tanks as far away from the water is the best. Holding tanks also seem to work not too badly.
Mm-hmm.
But I really worry about these very large guest houses that every morning, each of the individuals will use that toilet. And so it's best to try and avoid any leakage into the lake.
There you go. Now, okay, I totally agree with you there. Now let's chat about cottages that have been in the family and are sitting on properties. They've been there for 60 years. And maybe, quite possibly, they haven't updated or maintained their septic system. Now, is that also causing leakage into the lake? And there goes your phosphorus balance again. What's happening?
For sure. Especially, in the old days, we used to have to take the building materials by boat or barge.
Sure.
And so cottages were built fairly close to the water. But now, because of roads, they tend to be more back from the water.
Right.
So if somebody wants to say, well, I want to tear down my old place and build a nice new one, which just happens to be 5 times bigger, and they still want to have it close to the water. Mm. And they still want to have their lawn, and then they find out, oh, gee, when I cut down the trees and the shoreline stuff, I was getting soil erosion. So they bring in stones or concrete, and they have a solid wall to separate their place from the lake. But that little place is so important in sustaining the growth of the, as I mentioned, the invertebrates that become the food for the fish. I was surprised, something like 80% of the fish production occurs in 3 meters or less of your lake. So these are very productive zones that kind of interface with the edge. So it's really important to maintain the vegetation along the shore, especially in our reservoir lakes, where they drop the water a meter or so every year. Yeah, that is a dead zone along the shore. So it's even more important. And I will be presenting to the local council the need to conserve cottage shoreline in the next week. Yes, the maintaining the natural vegetation is really important. And if you've unfortunately cut too many trees or changed the natural vegetation, then it's really important to let nature come back and move some trees in and try and revegetate. Yeah. I can put some statistics on it. For example, runoff is up to 75% if you've got a changed shoreline. Wow. And only 15% if it's natural. So natural shorelines reduce runoff by a considerable amount. Yeah, 5 times. 5 times less runoff if you leave that shoreline more natural. And the water that isn't running off then goes in the soil, and it becomes a support system for your pine trees and your maple trees. There you go. Otherwise, if it runs off, the trees will die because they don't get enough water. Yeah, well, there you go. So for our American friends, when David says 3 meters, that's about 9 to 10 feet. So then you can measure that. Okay. So one of the associations close to us, I think it was either Clear Lake or Big Cedar Lake, used weevils. Yes. As to combat the milfoil, the Eurasian milfoil. So why don't we do that? Yeah. So try and get somebody to explain how much money they spent, because I've heard that it was about $300,000 worth of weevils that they put into the lake.
Oh my.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so they got a lot of advice from Trent University,
Uh-huh.
and so it seemed like such a good idea, but
Yeah.
it turned. I heard the professor give a lecture at the Kawartha Lake Stewards Association a few years ago.
Mhm.
And what he said was there were some short-term benefits, but then the weeds came back thicker than ever.
Oh,
Ouch. Yes, too
yeah.
bad. And what happened to the weevils that were purchased? Well, they don't overwinter in our cold winters.
Uh,
And so every year you got to buy new weevils. So not so good.
yeah.
It's not a solution.
Right. So we need stronger weevils that can last the winter. And of course, with our lake, as you mentioned, as a reservoir lake, we're going up and down. We don't, the ice levels, et cetera, are not helping, any sort of weevil survival.
Or they have to climb up on shore for the winter, and it's just too cold for them.
Wow.
Yeah. So you bring up a good point that the idea was to bring in weevils and they'll eat up the milfoil. So as I mentioned, I don't think weevils are a solution. So you say, well, what else?
Mm.
And so we have to be cautious about bringing in any species from outside because it's just another invasive species.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
The unintended consequences
yeah,
of
it was, if I might add, it was kind of like taking rabbits to Australia.
oops.
Yeah.
Oops.
And talking about invasive species, of course, people thought purple loosestrife was going to take
Yeah.
over and ruin all our wetlands, but now it's more or less in better shape.
Yeah.
And then we also have gypsy moth right now, and
Nope.
that's of course a plague to everyone.
Yeah.
But a few years ago, we had the elm trees dying back, and so people said, "Gee, we should kill it or cut all the elm trees." But the elms are doing fine again now.
There you go. Old Mother
So,
Nature seems to know what she's doing.
yeah, and in the case of the weeds, I think when there's that much green stuff for dinner, something's going to show up anyhow and take
Right.
care of it. So again, I'm on the side of saying, don't do anything. Certainly don't spray pesticide. There is one place for pesticides, and that is if suddenly a new weed slows up at one site or 10 sites in Ontario, and from other locations, people would say this is even worse than milfoil.
Yep.
Then there's no harm in probably spraying 10 sites. But with milfoil, it's everywhere.
Right.
So there's probably not enough reward left to spray everywhere. So it's just a stupid move in my mind.
Okay. And David's just mentioned reward herbicide, which the local government, I'm sorry, not the local government, the provincial government has approved these permits. Reward, it had to go through an incredible amount of approval process by, one of the largest chemical companies in the world. So there was a fair amount of influence being applied, pressure being applied to get that label approved. And the key ingredient, as I've read, David, is dicot. 37% of reward is dicot. And how does the world feel about dicot?
Yes, I think the European Union is usually ahead of US EPA, and they have banned it. So you say, well, why don't they allow it to be used in Europe? And the answer that they give is that it's toxic to birds and to bystanders.
Bystanders? Like innocent bystanders, David? I'm going for a swim.
How would you like another little glass of reward? It turns out that the same chemical is used to kill potatoes. People don't know that
Yes.
potatoes are the most pesticide treated.
Oh, yeah.
Number one, they use a fungicide so the potato doesn't rot when they stick it in the ground. And then they use a whole range of insecticides and herbicides, keep the weeds down, keep the bugs down. And at the end of the year, they add essentially the same chemical to kill the plant. So then they just run a collector through and pick up the potatoes.
Right.
And so, yes, it's banned in Europe, still allowed in Canada, and still going in to legally put into our lake.
Yeah.
So, as I said before, we did post on the Jacks Lake website references that people can read, and you don't have to take my word for it. It is considerably toxic to people. In fact, high levels of toxicity will cause all sorts of nervous problems. And so you say, okay, the high level will do that. What if I only have 1%? And, people talk, oh, it's only a part per million, but parts per billion of phosphorus will change the lake from being nice and clear to a pea soup color full of toxic blue-green algae, which I should mention just now, in the United States, a lot of places where weeds have been killed by herbicide, it releases phosphorus. That's a huge biomass that's suddenly killed. And the weeds will release their phosphorus very quickly,
right.
Long before they're decomposed. It's a process called autolysis. So you kill a plant, phosphorus comes back very quickly, stimulates the growth of toxic blue-green algae. So you can't drink the water, not because of the pesticide, but because of the toxin in these blue-greens.
Right.
And one of them needs the chemical that's in this herbicide. And it's been documented that it kills eagles.
It kills eagles.
Yes.
Which we're now starting to enjoy around the lake. I mean,
Exactly.
we're seeing them. It can't be good for loons. It can't, because they're eating the fish and other mollusks. And oh boy, oh boy, oh boy.
Exactly.
So it's a slippery slope, I think, is the point we should be aware of. Is it okay? 8 permits become 16, 16 permits become 32. And I think you and I are pretty much committed to helping that process get stopped on this lake.
Yeah, so the government always leans back on the Pesticide Management and Review Agency, which is part of Health Canada.
Right.
I know them well. I used to invite their leaders over to lecture to my class when I was at University of Ottawa, and they're doing an excellent job. However, the pesticide industry is really on their back. And I think that they're always being pushed to approve things.
Sure, yeah.
I think the whole process should be reviewed. And if they have some evidence to support what the government ministers are saying, I can even read it for you. So Dave Smith said, Health Canada's Pest Management Regulatory Agency has found that the impacts and risks associated with the use of reward are confined to the specific treatment area, are short-acting, and present minimal risk after application. And so that's Dave Smith. And in order to say that, you have to know, where is it going?
Yeah.
Is it being decomposed? Nobody knows. Is it, in fact, sticking to the algae that then become food for the zooplankton that are food for the fish? Are the fish in these areas safe to eat? They haven't addressed that at all. So this actually came out in the Peterborough Examiner.
Yeah, look at that. You're on the front page, David. This issue of, look at that. My goodness. And what does the headline say under your photo? It's not quite showing
Yeah.
up there.
Yeah, oh yes, it says cottagers oppose herbicide use. And many cottagers have indeed said, we need more transparency, we need to know details.
Right.
So what I'm saying is, if PMRA has convincing evidence that this is safe, why don't they publish it? I think when they go to the file, they'll find it's pretty empty.
Sure. Yeah.
Too often in Canada, we kind of follow the lead of the US Environmental Protection Agency, but there's books written about the relationship between this agency and the industry.
Yeah.
A lot of people kind of move back and forth, and so we need careful research. We need to look at these issues very carefully to make sure that we're not a little bit sick because of some exposure.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Let's just go back just quickly to the transfer from lake to lake of these invasive weeds, and it's just going to get more of a concern. And we've got Alberta that has a law that says you can't go from lake to lake with your boat unless it's been inspected, that everything's been drained, your boat's been cleaned. This is Alberta, not exactly
and Manitoba, I might add.
And Manitoba and Saskatchewan and even Quebec now have legislation. BC, of course, but have legislation. And here, Ontario, we have nothing. What are we going to do? I mean, should we be raising funds for our own boat cleaning stations? And then, but how do we enforce people to go to them?
Yes, I thought about that, and it's not the solution is not straightforward.
No.
I think the government should be more involved, and but the people that should actually pay for it are the people that want to take their boat into our lake.
Yeah.
So as you move from one lake to the other, there has to be a station where you can go swish, swish. You have a nice clean boat. You get a green card that then allows you to go to the launching ramp. You give the green card to the person. And when you go to the next lake, you have to wash your boat again. And this includes, for example, the police that come to make sure we have enough life jackets. The game warden that comes to make sure that, they go lake to lake.
Yeah.
And so, yes, even something as small as a personal watercraft, we see a lot of those showing up. Yeah. And so all they need is to wash up a little bit. And I think it would be better.
And in a way, it's a win-win because they'll get to enjoy a lake, or they'll get to enjoy the recreation of that lake, whether it be fishing or boating or sailing, canoeing. Let's think about canoes coming off the racks of cars. Should they have a quick rinse? Well,
of course, yeah,
exactly.
And will Eurasion millfoil be the last invasive species? And the answer is absolutely not. And the lakes that we mentioned now, Stony Lake, for example, just south of us, Big Cedar Lake, they have something called spiny stonewort, and this is much thicker, much denser, and it smells like pig manure when it rots. So how would you like that along your dock?
Well, thanks.
So that's only one on the horizon. There's many more.
Yeah. Well, yeah. When you say like we've got people coming on the lake, like the OPP, and we've got construction people, we've got Bell, hydro, whatever, and basically, they're nice people, of course, and they charge reasonable rates. Looking at you, Bell Canada, and yet they're not taking the responsibility. Maybe they don't even know they have a responsibility for the safety of the land, and the water.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great. All right. So we are going to do something about this, aren't we? We are not going to wait. Come on. there's no point. I mean, the riskiest thing we can do right now is to play it safe, and to think that someone else is going to take care of this. There isn't anyone else but us, and we have to mobilize, and we have to make sure that people are thinking and doing better things about lake health. Is that right or wrong?
That's absolutely true. And so we've seen a lot of cutbacks in government programs. For years, we've been able to send our samples away for analysis of phosphorus. And so you see long-term changes. And also, Paul Frost at Trent University has a new program now where he's looking at many of the lakes in this region. And so he'll be looking at changes over time.
Right.
And this is a very positive thing.
Right.
But I think the government of Ontario and even the federal government has cut back so much on their environmental programs that our universities are training very competent young people. And now when they finish, they won't have a job. Yeah. So I think overall, this is just one of many environmental problems that our government is letting us down. We do need, because they've tried to download it to municipalities that just aren't equipped to deal with these complex problems.
Yeah, so we have to keep some pressure on them, and it's not just being noisy. If the activism has to have, something behind it. The very fact that our area, North Kawartha, is so much dependent on tourism, and the revenue that's generated, and we could see that go down the drain within 10 to 15 years. I mean, there's an impact of doing nothing, and yet there's a positive way of preserving this beautiful environment ecosystem that we have. So just your own personal views, David, on what's happening up at Chandos. What do you think they're doing up there that's good or bad or indifferent?
They're essentially redoing what's been done in many places across the country. And so, yes, it's a learning process, and I'm glad they're doing it. I don't think there's any benefit to the techniques other than using a rake, as I mentioned, and cleaning up around your dock.
Right.
If you put down the mats on the bottom, you're supposed to pull them up again in the fall. I don't know who's watching, but that would be a hell of a job.
Yeah.
And the other technique, some people have installed bubblers. They have bubblers around their dock, and this moves the muck from your dock and pushes it away. So your neighbor will get more weeds, or 20 feet from your dock, you'll have worse weeds than you ever had before.
Okay.
So I don't like bubblers. The rakes that you use to get them should also get roots if you can.
Yep.
And so that's not a big chore for anybody. And
it's kind of soothing, isn't it? I mean, you throw that rake out there, it's not back-breaking. The weeds come out pretty easily.
Yes. I think that compare that to adding a toxic chemical. Use a rake. Yeah,
use a rake. And maybe someday we'll be sponsored by Rakezilla, which is which is my favorite rake. I have two. Actually, I have three rakes now, and they all work. And I have carved a pathway, because we have a big infestation of milfoil, or Eurasian milfoil, in front of us. Now, why do I keep saying Eurasian milfoil? There's milfoil, and then there's Eurasian milfoil. Is there not? Is there a segmentation of that weed that we should know about, or just?
Yeah, in fact, there's a northern milfoil that also exists in Jack's Lake. It looks very similar, so you need an expert to distinguish it.
Okay.
But the scientific word is Myriophyllum spicata, and so it's clearly described, and I guess it came from Europe originally, so it's Eurasian Millfoil.
Yeah, there you go. Well, there, David, it's been wonderful chatting to you, Dr. Lane. We are so privileged to have you in our community around the lake and in Apsley. Your family has been a backbone of the culture and of the community, and it's just great to be able to have you close by and have you on the Jack Lake Weed Warrior movement. And we are going to make things happen. So
Right.
Onward we go. So thanks for spending some time with us today. And if
be
you've got
here.
questions for David, post them on our Facebook page. This interview will be on the Facebook page as well as on our website, which is now getting more robust. So you can reference this whenever you like. And Dave will be available for autographs and photos at the next regatta, you know, because you want your selfies done with a world expert on freshwater health. And so anyway, thank you, David, and we'll see you at the lake.
Okay.
Okay, bye
Yes.
for now.